The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Al Udeid Air Base like a blade through silk. Major Kestrel Viper Thorn was already suited up, her helmet tucked under her arm as she studied the mission brief that had arrived 30 minutes earlier. The paper trembled slightly in the desert wind, but her hands remained steady. She had flown 127 combat sorties over 3 deployments, yet something about this one felt different. The mission parameters were classified beyond her clearance level, unusual for a routine close air support request. "Viper, you copy." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, operations officer for the 480th Fighter Squadron. His tone carried an edge she hadn't heard before. "SEAL Team 7 is requesting immediate air support for a high-value target extraction. Grid coordinates follow." She keyed her mic. "Copy, Control, what's the threat assessment?" A pause too long. "Unknown hostiles, possible surface-to-air missile systems. You'll be going in alone, low altitude. The package they're extracting. It's time-sensitive." Kestrel's jaw tightened. In 6 years of flying F-16s, she had never been sent on a solo mission into contested airspace. The Pentagon didn't risk multi-million-dollar aircraft and highly trained pilots on suicide runs. Yet here she was, walking toward her Falcon as technicians performed final checks on the weapons systems. The aircraft gleamed under the floodlights, its gray skin adorned with 13 small yellow stars, one for each enemy aircraft she had destroyed in air-to-air combat. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, approached with the engine start checklist. "Ma'am, I've been turning wrenches on these birds for 12 years. Never seen a loadout like this." He gestured toward the hardpoints beneath her aircraft's wings. Instead of the standard complement of air-to-ground missiles, her F-16 carried a mixture of precision-guided munitions and electronic warfare pods. "Whatever you're flying into, it's gonna be hot." Kestrel nodded, accepting the clipboard. She had earned her call sign Viper during her second deployment, when she had single-handedly engaged 6 enemy fighters over Syria, downing 3 and forcing the others to retreat. The media had called it luck. Her squadron knew better. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the battlefield, to see patterns in chaos that others missed. But tonight, as she climbed into her cockpit and began the startup sequence, that intuitive gift felt more like a curse. The mission briefing had mentioned SEAL Team 7 was requesting drone support for Overwatch. Instead, they were getting her, a single fighter pilot diving into unknown territory. As her engine spun up and the familiar vibration filled the cockpit, Kestrel wondered if she would live to understand why. Dawn was still 2 hours away when she taxied toward the runway, her navigation lights cutting through the darkness like falling stars. The radio traffic from Grid Square 7724 had gone silent 43 minutes ago. Major Kestrel Viper Thorn banked her F-16 into a shallow turn, maintaining 500 feet above the Afghan mountains as she approached the coordinates. Her heads-up display painted the terrain in green phosphorescent lines, revealing a landscape of razor-sharp ridges and hidden valleys where entire armies could disappear. The silence from SEAL Team 7 wasn't unusual. Special Operations Forces maintained radio discipline religiously, but something in her gut suggested otherwise. "Viper, this is Neptune 7 Actual," a gravelly voice suddenly cut through the static. The SEAL team leader sounded winded, his words clipped with the efficiency of a man under extreme pressure. "We have eyes on the package, but the situation has deteriorated. Request immediate close air support on my mark." She keyed her transmit button. "Neptune 7, this is Viper. Copy your request. What's your status?" "We're pinned down in a compound approximately 2 clicks northeast of our original insertion point. Heavy small arms fire, possible RPGs. The package is mobile, heading toward the border. We need you to clear a path." Kestrel's fingers danced across her weapons control panel, selecting her first precision-guided munition. Through her night vision system, she could see muzzle flashes winking like malevolent fireflies in the valley below. The SEAL team was indeed surrounded, their positions marked by the distinctive infrared strobes visible only to friendly forces. But something didn't align with the intelligence briefing. Neptune 7, confirmed package description. My mission brief was limited. Another pause. When the SEAL team leader responded, his voice carried a weight that made her chest tighten. Viper, the package is a high-value individual with actionable intelligence on an imminent terrorist attack. Female, approximately 25 years old. She's been held captive for 8 months. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a routine extraction. They were rescuing someone who had been tortured, brutalized, forgotten by the world above these mountains. Kestrel felt her grip tighten on the control stick as she identified the first target, a machine gun position that was raking the SEAL's defensive perimeter with sustained fire. Neptune 7, I have visual on hostile positions. Danger close. Mark your location. Copy Viper, marking now. Red smoke began to rise from the SEAL team's position, a crimson beacon in the pre-dawn darkness. Kestrel rolled, inverted, and pulled her fighter into a steep dive, feeling the familiar embrace of G-forces as she lined up her attack run. Below her, the enemy had no idea that death was falling from the sky at 400 knots. Her first missile streaked downward, its trail visible as a brilliant white line in her night vision display. The explosion bloomed like an orange flower against the mountainside, silencing the machine gun that had threatened to overrun the SEAL position. But as she pulled up from her attack run, climbing back into the relative safety of higher altitude, Kestrel noticed movement on her radar that made her blood run cold. 6 hostile aircraft were approaching from the northwest, flying low and fast. The enemy fighters appeared on Major Kestrel Thorne's radar display like digital ghosts materializing from the electronic ether. 6 contacts, flying in 2 tight formations, altitude 200 feet above the valley floor. Their flight profile suggested Soviet-era aircraft, likely MiG-21s or MiG-23s, piloted by mercenaries or foreign nationals operating in Afghan airspace without authorization. In her headset, she could hear the SEAL team leader coordinating their defensive positions, while maintaining suppressing fire against the compound, where their rescue target remained trapped. "Control, this is Viper," she transmitted on the secure frequency back to Al-Udeid. "I have 6 hostile aircraft inbound to my position. Request immediate backup." The response crackled through layers of atmospheric interference. "Negative, Viper. All other assets are committed. You are weapons-free. Protect Neptune 7 at all costs." She felt her jaw clench. 6 against 1. In air-to-air combat, numerical superiority often determined the outcome regardless of pilot skill or aircraft capability. But the SEALs below were counting on her, and somewhere in that compound, a young woman who had endured 8 months of captivity was depending on their mission's success. "Neptune 7, this is Viper. I have multiple hostile aircraft approaching your position. Recommend you expedite extraction." "Copy Viper. We're working on it. The package is secured, but we need 5 more minutes to reach the extraction point." 5 minutes. In aerial combat, 5 minutes was an eternity. Kestrel rolled her F-16 into a defensive spiral, gaining altitude while maintaining visual contact with the approaching enemy formation. Her radar warning receiver remained ominously quiet. The hostile aircraft weren't actively targeting her yet, which meant they either lacked sophisticated fire control systems or were hopping to achieve surprise. She selected her first air-to-air missile, an AIM-120 AMRAAM with a range of over 60 miles. The weapons seeker head was already tracking the lead enemy aircraft when she squeezed the trigger. The missile dropped from her wing pylon and ignited its rocket motor, accelerating away from her aircraft like a man-made comet. "Fox 3, she announced over the radio, using the standard call for an active radar-guided missile launch. 30 seconds later, the lead MiG-21 disappeared from her radar screen in a brief shower of electronic debris. But the remaining 5 aircraft had spread out and were climbing aggressively, their pilots now aware they were engaged with a superior opponent. Her radio warning receiver suddenly came alive with multiple threat tones. She was being painted by enemy fire control radars from 3 different directions. The hostile pilots were attempting to triangulate her position and overwhelm her defensive systems through coordinated attacks. Kestrel pulled her fighter into a high-G turn, feeling the familiar weight of acceleration pressing her deeper into her ejection seat. Below her, tracer fire was still visible around the SEAL team's position, creating a deadly light show against the darkness. "Viper, we're at the extraction point. 30 seconds. She keyed her mic while tracking 2 enemy aircraft that were attempting to bracket her altitude. "Copy, Neptune 7. Keep your heads down." Major Kestrel Thorne's F-16 shuddered as the first enemy missile streaked past her left wing, its proximity fuse failing to detonate by mere feet. The MiG-23 that had fired it was already turning hard to avoid her counterattack, but Kestrel had been anticipating the move. She rolled inverted and pulled through the vertical, using her aircraft's superior thrust-to-weight ratio to gain an energy advantage over the older Soviet fighter. "Fox 2, she called as her AIM-9 Sidewinder left the rail, tracking the heat signature of the MiG's exhaust. The infrared-guided missile found its target 3 seconds later, turning the enemy aircraft into an expanding fireball that briefly illuminated the mountainside below. 4 remaining hostiles. Her fuel gauge showed 6,400 pounds remaining, enough for perhaps 10 more minutes of high-intensity combat before she would need to consider withdrawing to a tanker aircraft. But the SEALs were still vulnerable on the ground, and she could hear the distinctive rotor wash of their extraction helicopter approaching from the south. "Neptune 7, this is Rescue 1. I have visual on your smoke 2 minutes out." The helicopter pilot's voice was calm, professional, betraying no fear despite flying into a combat zone where 6 aircraft were engaged in a deadly aerial dance overhead. Kestrel felt a surge of respect for the aircrew who would hover exposed, while the SEAL team and their rescued prisoner climbed aboard. Her radar warning receiver screamed as 2 enemy aircraft achieved missile lock simultaneously. She deployed chaff and flares while pulling into a vertical climb, trading airspeed for altitude in a desperate attempt to break the targeting solutions. The first missile missed cleanly, fooled by the metallic chaff strips she had ejected. The second missile tracked true but lost energy as her F-16 climbed beyond its engagement envelope. "Viper package is aboard. Rescue 1 is departing." Relief flooded through her as she watched the helicopter's navigation lights recede toward friendly territory. The rescue mission was complete, but her own survival remained uncertain. 3 enemy fighters were still hunting her, and her ammunition was running low. She rolled out of her climb at 15,000 feet, scanning the night sky for hostile contacts. Her radar showed the remaining MiGs had descended to low altitude, possibly attempting to evade her superior sensors by flying close to the ground clutter. But Kestrel had developed an intuitive understanding of aerial tactics through years of combat experience. She knew they would try to bracket her position and force her into a defensive engagement where their numerical advantage would prove decisive. Instead, she pointed her aircraft's nose toward the Pakistan border and accelerated to maximum military power. The enemy pilots would have to choose between pursuing her into increasingly hostile territory or breaking off the engagement. Either choice would give her the tactical advantage she needed. Her radio crackled with a transmission from Al Udeid Air Base. "Viper, control. We show Rescue 1 clear of the combat area. You are cleared to engage or withdraw at your discretion." She looked at her fuel gauge again. 5,800 pounds, enough for one more engagement if she chose her tactics carefully. "Control, this is Viper, I'm staying." The 3 remaining enemy aircraft had formed a loose trail formation, climbing steadily as they pursued Major Kestrel Thorne's F-16 toward the Pakistan border. Their pilots were displaying impressive discipline, maintaining radar silence while using passive sensors to track her exhaust signature. But Kestrel had fought this type of engagement before. During her second deployment over Syria, she had survived a similar numerical disadvantage by turning the enemy's coordination against them. She reduced power to military thrust and began a gentle descent, allowing the hostile aircraft to close the distance while she selected her next weapon. The AIM-120 AMRAAM on her port wing pylon was her last beyond visual range missile. After that, she would be reduced to guns and short-range sidewinders, a significant disadvantage against multiple opponents. Control, this is Viper. I'm going to attempt to separate the hostile formation. If this doesn't work, I'll need that tanker standing by. Copy, Viper. Texaco 77 is holding at Angels 20, bearing 090 from your position. The fuel tanker was 20 miles away at 20,000 feet, close enough to reach if she could disengage from combat, but far enough that the enemy might intercept her during the vulnerable refueling process. She pushed the concern aside and focused on the tactical problem at hand. Her radar warning receiver indicated the trailing MiG was attempting to achieve missile lock. She waited until the tone became constant, indicating the enemy pilot was committed to his attack, then executed a sudden defensive break to the left while climbing. The maneuver was designed to force the hostile formation to react, breaking their mutual support and creating an opportunity for her to engage them individually. The tactic worked perfectly. The lead MiG followed her climb while the second and third aircraft attempted to bracket her escape route, but Kestrel had anticipated their response. She rolled inverted at the top of her climb and pulled through into a high-speed dive, using gravity to accelerate her aircraft while lining up a shot on the trailing enemy fighter. Her last AMRAAM guided true, destroying the MiG-23 in a brilliant explosion that temporarily blinded her night vision system. But the victory came at a cost. The remaining two enemy aircraft had achieved advantageous positions and were converging on her location from opposite directions. Viper, we're showing two hostile contacts still active. What's your status? She keyed her mic while pulling hard G-forces in a defensive turn. Control, I'm engaged with two hostiles, ammunition running low. Her fuel gauge now showed 4,200 pounds. The mathematics of aerial combat were becoming increasingly unfavorable, but as she watched the two remaining enemy aircraft maneuvering for position, she noticed something that sparked a tactical idea. They were flying identical attack profiles, suggesting their pilots had trained together extensively. Their coordination was their strength, but it might also be their weakness. She rolled her F-16 into a knife-edge flight attitude and began transmitting on the emergency frequency. Mayday, Mayday. This is U.S. Air Force Viper. I am Winchester on missiles and critically low on fuel. The transmission was a deliberate deception, designed to convince the enemy pilots that she was defenseless and desperate. But her weapons control panel showed two AIM-9 sidewinders still mounted on her wing rails, and her internal cannon contained 240 rounds of 20 ammunition. The enemy formation tightened as they moved in for what they believed would be an easy kill. The two remaining MiG-21s approached from Major Kestrel Thorne's 3 and 9 o'clock positions, their pilots executing a classic pincer movement designed to eliminate her escape options. They had taken her false distress call as confirmation that the American fighter was defenseless, but Kestrel was counting on their overconfidence. She maintained level flight while secretly arming her remaining Sidewinder missiles, their seekers already tracking the heat signatures of the approaching enemy aircraft. At a range of 2 miles, she suddenly broke left toward the eastern MiG while simultaneously launching both remaining air-to-air missiles. Fox 2, Fox 2, she announced, though the enemy pilots wouldn't understand her brevity code. The first Sidewinder tracked perfectly, destroying the MiG in a cascading explosion of fuel and metal. The second missile missed as its target pilot executed a violent defensive maneuver, but Kestrel had expected that outcome. She was already pulling through a high-G turn toward the surviving aircraft when her radar warning receiver detected the telltale signature of an infrared-guided missile launch. The enemy pilot had fired his last heat-seeking weapon from maximum range, hopping to achieve a lucky hit. Kestrel deployed flares and pulled into a vertical climb, using her superior thrust-to-weight ratio to break the missile's tracking solution. But the defensive maneuver had cost her airspeed and positional advantage. The surviving MiG was now behind her at co-altitude, its pilot maneuvering for a cannon shot. She could see tracer rounds beginning to flash past her cockpit as the enemy fighter closed to gun range. Her F-16's internal cannon held 240 rounds of 20 ammunition, enough for perhaps 6 seconds of continuous fire. Against a maneuvering target, she would need to make every shot count. She rolled inverted and pulled through into a descending spiral, forcing the enemy pilot to follow her flight path while she searched for an opportunity to reverse their positions. "Control, this is Viper. I'm engaged in a knife fight with one remaining hostile. I may need to withdraw soon." Her fuel gauge showed 3,400 pounds. At current consumption rates, she had perhaps 12 minutes of flight time remaining before reaching emergency reserves. But something in her peripheral vision caught her attention, a second set of navigation lights approaching from the west. "Viper, this is Falcon 2-1. We're 2 F-16s inbound to your position. ETA 3 minutes. Relief flooded through her as she realized reinforcements were finally arriving. She keyed her mic while pulling out of her defensive spiral. "Copy, Falcon 2-1. I have one hostile remaining. He's on my 6, approximately 500 feet." But the enemy pilot had apparently monitored their radio transmission. The MiG suddenly broke off its attack and descended toward the valley floor, using the mountainous terrain to mask its retreat toward the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Kestrel considered pursuing, but her fuel situation was becoming critical. "Control, this is Viper. The remaining hostile has withdrawn. I'm Winchester on all weapons and need immediate tanker support." "Copy, Viper. Texaco 77 is cleared to begin descent. Rendezvous at Angels 15, bearing 090 from your position." As she climbed toward the aerial refueling track, Kestrel allowed herself a moment to process what had just occurred. She had engaged 6 enemy fighters single-handedly, destroying 5 and forcing the 6th to withdraw. More importantly, she had protected the SEAL team during their rescue mission, ensuring the successful extraction of a hostage who had suffered 8 months of captivity. Her hands trembled slightly as she extended her F-16's aerial refueling probe. The KC-135 tanker's boom made contact with Major Kestrel Thorne's F-16 with a metallic clunk that resonated through her airframe. Fuel began flowing at 300 gallons per minute, gradually restoring her aircraft's range and endurance. Through her canopy, she could see the tanker crew's observation windows, their faces illuminated by red cockpit lighting as they monitored the refueling process. Below them, the mountains of Afghanistan stretched toward the horizon like frozen waves in an endless sea of darkness. "Viper, this is Texaco 77. You're taking fuel normally. How much do you need?" She checked her fuel totalizer display. "Texaco, I'll take 6,000 pounds. That should get me home with reserves." The tanker pilot's voice carried a note of professional curiosity. "Copy, 6,000 pounds. We monitored your engagement on the tactical frequency. Hell of a fight." As fuel continued transferring from the KC-135's tanks to her own, Kestrel found herself reflecting on the mission that had brought her to this moment. 3 hours ago, she had been briefed on what appeared to be a routine close air support request. Instead, she had found herself protecting a hostage rescue operation while simultaneously engaging in the most intense aerial combat of her career. "Texaco, fuel transfer complete. Thanks for the gas." Copy Viper, safe flight home. She disconnected from the aerial refueling boom and banked toward Al Udeid Air Base, her navigation system calculating a flight time of 47 minutes. The sun was beginning to rise over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that reminded her why she had chosen to become a fighter pilot. Up here, suspended between Earth and space, the complexities of ground warfare seemed distant and manageable. Her radio crackled with a transmission from Bagram Air Base. "Viper, this is Neptune 7 Actual. We're on the ground at Bagram. The package is receiving medical attention, but she wanted me to pass along a message." Kestrel felt her throat tighten. "Go ahead, Neptune 7. She said to tell the pilot who saved her life that she watched the whole fight from the helicopter. She's never seen anything like it. She wanted you to know that you gave her hope when she thought there wasn't any left in the world." The words hit her with unexpected emotional force. Throughout her military career, she had focused on tactical objectives and mission success rates, measuring her effectiveness through statistical analysis of target destruction and threat elimination. But this was different. Her actions had directly saved an individual human being from continued suffering, transforming her from victim to survivor in the span of a single helicopter flight. "Neptune 7, please tell her that we don't leave people behind. Ever." Copy Viper, she already knows. She's going home to see her family for the first time in 8 months. As Kestrel continued her flight toward Al Udeid, she began to understand that this mission would be remembered differently from her previous combat sorties. The tactical victory was significant. Destroying 5 enemy aircraft while protecting friendly forces represented exceptional performance by any measure. But the human element would resonate far beyond the official after-action reports and performance evaluations. Her radio came alive with another transmission. "Viper, this is Control. You're cleared direct Al Udeid. Maintenance is standing by for post-flight inspection." Copy Control, Viper inbound. Below her, the landscape was gradually transitioning from the harsh mountains of Afghanistan to the desert expanses of Qatar. But her mind remained focused on the young woman who was finally free. Major Kestrel Thorne's F-16 touched down at Al Udeid Air Base as the morning sun painted the Qatar desert in shades of gold and copper. She taxied toward the maintenance hangar where her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, was waiting with the post-flight inspection team. The aircraft felt different beneath her hands as she guided it into the parking spot, not mechanically, but symbolically. It had carried her through the most significant combat engagement of her career, and she could see the evidence etched into its aluminum skin. Rodriguez climbed onto the aircraft as she shut down the engines, his expression shifting from professional concern to amazement as he examined the wing pylons. "Ma'am, you expended everything. Every missile, most of your cannon ammunition. What the hell happened out there?" She began unbuckling her harness while the engine noise faded to silence. 6-on-1 engagement over the target area. The mission was more complex than briefed. 6 enemy fighters, Rodriguez's voice carried a note of disbelief. "And you got them all." 5 confirmed destroyed, 1 withdrew. She climbed out of the cockpit, her legs slightly unsteady after 4 hours of high-stress flying. The aircraft performed flawlessly, no mechanical issues. But as she walked around her F-16 during the post-flight inspection, she could see the story of the engagement written in metal and composite materials. Stress marks along the wing roots indicated she had pulled the aircraft to its design limits during defensive maneuvering. Scorch marks near the cannon muzzle showed the intensity of the close-range combat phase. Most telling were the empty weapons pylons. Her fighter had left Al Udeid fully armed and returned completely Winchester. Lieutenant Colonel Webb approached as she completed her inspection checklist. His expression was unreadable, but she could sense the questions forming behind his eyes. "Major Thorne, I need a preliminary debrief before you stand down. Intel is very interested in your engagement." They walked toward the squadron operations building, past other F-16s that were being prepared for the day's flying schedule. Normal peacetime operations seemed surreal after what she had experienced over the Afghan mountains. Other pilots nodded respectfully as she passed, having already heard fragments of her story through the informal communication network that connected all fighter squadrons. "Sir, the mission parameters were significantly different from what was briefed," she began as they entered the debriefing room. "The SEAL team was extracting a hostage, not conducting reconnaissance. Enemy air activity was far beyond intelligence estimates." Webb activated the digital recording system and opened his notebook. "Start from the beginning. Everything you remember in chronological order." For the next 2 hours, she reconstructed the entire mission from takeoff to landing, describing each tactical decision and engagement sequence in precise detail. The debriefing was both cathartic and exhausting, requiring her to relive moments that had unfolded in seconds but would influence military doctrine for years to come. "Major, preliminary analysis suggests you achieved the highest single-mission air-to-air kill ratio in the past decade. 5 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed in one sortie is unprecedented in current operations." She felt a mixture of pride and humility. The statistical significance was undeniable, but her mind kept returning to the SEAL team leader's message about giving hope to someone who had lost it. That human connection transcended any tactical achievement. "Sir, I'd like to submit a commendation request for my crew chief. Rodriguez prepped the aircraft perfectly. Every system performed exactly as required." Webb made a note in his file. "Noted. Get some rest, Major. This is going to generate significant attention at higher levels." As she walked toward her quarters, the weight of exhaustion finally settling into her bones, Kestrel wondered how the story would be told in the years to come. News of Major Kestrel Thorne's aerial engagement spread through military channels with the velocity of a classified lightning strike. Within 12 hours, her after-action report had reached the Pentagon, where senior Air Force leadership recognized the mission's significance both tactically and symbolically. 6-versus-1 odds were the stuff of Hollywood fiction, but her flight recorder data and gun camera footage provided irrefutable evidence of what had actually occurred over the mountains of Afghanistan. Colonel James Morrison, commander of the 480th Fighter Squadron, found her in the base library 3 days later, quietly reading a technical manual on advanced air-to-air tactics. Her approach to professional development had always impressed him. While other pilots celebrated successful missions, she studied theoretical improvements for future engagements. "Major Thorne, I need to speak with you about the media attention your mission has generated." She looked up from her manual, her expression neutral but alert. "Sir, I filed my report through appropriate channels. I haven't discussed the mission with anyone outside the chain of command." "I know, and that's exactly what I'd expect from you, but the story has leaked anyway. CNN is calling it the Angel of Afghanistan. Fox News is running with 1 against 6. The narrative is becoming bigger than the actual tactical event." Kestrel felt her stomach tighten. Throughout her career, she had deliberately avoided media attention, believing that professional competence should speak for itself. The idea of becoming a poster image for military recruiting campaigns or political messaging felt deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, what are my obligations?" Morrison sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Officially, you're not required to participate in any media interviews, but unofficially, the Air Force is receiving significant positive coverage for the first time in months. Your mission is being portrayed as evidence that our training and equipment superiority remain decisive factors in modern warfare." She closed the technical manual and faced him directly. "What aren't you telling me, sir?" "The hostage you helped rescue has requested to meet you. She's at Walter Reed Medical Center receiving treatment, but she specifically asked to thank the pilot who covered her extraction. The request surprised her more than any media attention could. Throughout her military career, she had measured success through mission completion rates and threat elimination statistics. The human faces behind those numbers remained abstract, separated by the clinical language of after-action reports and intelligence summaries. But this was different. This was personal. Has the Air Force approved the meeting? Yes, but with conditions. You would fly to Walter Reed on official orders, no media present, no recordings. Just you and her, along with appropriate medical supervision. She's been through extensive trauma, but the doctors believe the meeting would aid her psychological recovery. Kestrel nodded slowly. The tactical aspects of her Afghanistan mission were already being analyzed by weapons schools and staff colleges, but the human dimension remained unresolved. Somewhere in a military hospital, a young woman was recovering from 8 months of captivity, and her rescue had depended on split-second decisions made at 400 knots above hostile territory. "I'll go," she said simply. Morrison stood and handed her a folder containing her travel orders. "Your flight to Andrews Air Force Base departs tomorrow at 800. The meeting is scheduled for the following afternoon." That evening, as she packed her dress blue uniform for the trip to Walter Reed, Kestrel found herself wondering what she would say to someone whose freedom had cost 5 enemy aircraft and nearly her own life. The tactical victory had been clear-cut, but the emotional complexity was just beginning to unfold. Outside her quarters, other pilots were discussing the mission in terms that made her uncomfortable. Words like heroic and legendary seemed to miss the point entirely. She had simply done her job. Walter Reed Medical Center's corridors smelled of antiseptic and institutional carpet, a sterile environment that seemed worlds away from the mountains of Afghanistan, where Major Kestrel Thorne had fought to protect a hostage extraction 3 weeks earlier. She walked beside Colonel Morrison through the psychiatric ward, her dress blue uniform feeling unusually formal and constraining compared to her normal flight suit. "Her name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen," Morrison explained quietly. "Army intelligence officer. She was captured during a reconnaissance mission gone wrong. 8 months in Taliban custody." Kestrel stopped walking. "Sir, you said her name was classified during the original briefing." "It was, until she requested this meeting. She specifically waived her privacy protections because she wanted to thank you personally." They approached a private room where a young woman sat by the window, gazing out at the Maryland landscape. Chen appeared smaller than Kestrel had imagined, wearing civilian clothes that seemed too large for her frame. But when she turned to face them, her eyes held an alertness that spoke of inner strength refined by unimaginable hardship. "Lieutenant Chen, this is Major Thorne, the pilot who provided air support during your extraction." Chen stood slowly, extending her hand. "Major, I watched your entire engagement from the helicopter. I've never seen anything like it." The handshake was firm, but Kestrel could feel the slight tremor that indicated ongoing psychological trauma. She had read studies about hostage recovery, but academic knowledge felt inadequate when confronted with the reality of someone who had endured months of captivity. "Lieutenant, I was just doing my job. The real heroes were the SEAL team who came to get you." Chen smiled for the first time since they had entered the room. "With respect, ma'am, that's exactly what they said about you. Everyone wants to deflect credit." They sat down across from each other, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the hospital windows. For several moments, neither woman spoke, both processing the surreal nature of their meeting. One had been trapped in a Taliban compound, the other had been fighting at 20,000 feet. Now they were connected by a shared experience that few others could understand. "Major, can I ask you something? When you were engaging those enemy fighters, did you know what was at stake down on the ground?" Kestrel considered the question carefully. "I knew there was a hostage rescue in progress. I knew the SEAL team needed protection. but I didn't know the personal details until after the mission. Would it have changed anything if you had known? No, the tactical requirements were the same regardless of who we were rescuing. Chen leaned forward slightly. But it changes everything for me. When I heard that radio traffic, when I saw those missiles streaking down from your aircraft, it was the first time in 8 months that I believed I might actually survive. Not just the rescue attempt, but everything. I had given up hope, Major. You gave it back to me. The words carried an emotional weight that surprised Kestrel. Throughout her career, she had focused on tactical proficiency and mission effectiveness, measuring success through quantifiable metrics. But sitting across from Chen, she began to understand that her actions had transcended military objectives. Lieutenant, I need you to know that we don't leave people behind. Ever. The entire military was working to bring you home. Chen nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I know that now, but for 8 months I wondered if anyone was looking for me, if anyone cared enough to risk their lives for mine. They talked for another hour, sharing details about their respective experiences during the rescue operation. Chen described the psychological impact of hearing American aircraft overhead. Kestrel explained the tactical challenges of engaging multiple enemy fighters while protecting ground forces. Gradually, both women began to understand how their individual actions had combined to create a larger story of resilience and professional competence. As the meeting concluded, Chen stood and saluted despite being in civilian clothes. Thank you, Major, for everything. Kestrel returned the salute, feeling the weight of responsibility that extended far beyond any single combat mission. The flight back to Al Udeid gave Major Kestrel Thorne time to process her meeting with Lieutenant Chen, but the emotional complexity only deepened as her C-130 transport crossed the Atlantic toward the Middle East. She had entered the military to fly fighters and serve her country, accepting the abstract possibility that her actions might save lives. But Chen had transformed that abstraction into vivid personal reality, creating a human connection that would influence every subsequent mission. Upon returning to Qatar, she discovered that her story had evolved in unexpected directions during her absence.